Hi, this is Jen from I Never Saw That. It's a podcast. You're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Are you listening?
Welcome back to Two Broads Talking Politics. As usual, I am Sophy, and I'm here with your co-host, Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, everyone.
And tonight, our guest is John Bonifaz. He is one of three co-authors of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're very excited, and I'm particularly excited because I am a big proponent of impeachment, and I know some of our listeners are going to be very excited to read this book. So, let's get started asking a little bit about your background. How did you come to be involved in writing this book?
So thank you. I'm the president and co-founder of Free Speech for People. We're a national nonprofit campaign organization that works around the country to defend our Constitution and our democracy. We were launched on the day of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC in January of 2010. That was the ruling which equated corporations as people with political speech rights and effectively exponentially increased the amount of money going into our elections by sweeping away a century of precedent barring corporate money in elections. We have been engaged in taking on big money in politics and unchecked corporate power for 8+ years, but we decided as a board that we could not be true to that mandate after this past election without also taking on the unprecedented corruption coming into the White House, with this president, then President-elect Trump, refusing to divest from his business interests before taking the oath of office. So that's how we got involved in calling for an impeachment investigation. We've been there on day one, launching a campaign with Roots Action at impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org that called for that impeachment investigation from the moment he took the oath, because he was violating the two anti-corruption provisions of the Constitution without having divested from his business interests. And then we've built up the campaign beyond that to address many other impeachable offenses this president has committed. And that led to a briefing paper we issued in December of 2017 at the National Press Club, which Tom Steyer joined us in releasing. And that further led us to decide with co-authors Ron Fein, our legal director, and Ben Clements, our board chair, to author this book, an much more expanded version of what we released in December, to make the case as to why we must have impeachment proceedings now against this president.
And to whom are you trying to make the case? Is this a case to the American people? Are you hoping to reach Congress? Who are you aiming your argument at?
Well, we're aiming this argument at the entire country, to the American people, to members of Congress, to all who deeply care about our Constitution and our democracy, to recognize this is a nonpartisan fight that we are focused on here. This is not about a political strategy. This is about whether we are going to defend our Constitution and our democracy that is under attack by the person in the Oval Office today.
I think some of our listeners might not 100% understand what impeachment means. I think most people understand that impeachment is a serious issue for a president, but since many of us, may have grown up, like me, during the era of the Clinton impeachment, where Bill Clinton was technically impeached by the House, but nothing happened to him, really. Could you talk through what impeachment is and what you're advocating that we do?
Yes. The framers placed the impeachment clause, which is Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. They placed it in the Constitution precisely because they wanted to ensure that no one would be above the law, including the President of the United States. And it reads, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This is designed to deal with crimes against the state, abuse of power, abuse of the public trust. Some people sometimes mix the word high crimes and misdemeanors as meaning somehow we have to show there's a criminal conviction, a violation of federal criminal laws or state criminal laws before you can move to impeachment. That's actually not true. The framers were not focused on that when they put that clause in the Constitution. They were focused on this broader question of crimes against the state, abuse of power, abuse of the public trust, and the remedy was to remove that civil officer from office in the case of the president, to remove the president if so necessary. It's not actually designed as a punishment. It's designed to preserve the republic, to preserve the Constitution, to ensure that we're not going to go down the road of having a monarch who claims that he or she is above the law. And that is a fundamental bedrock principle of our democracy, that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
So I didn't realize before reading this, I knew what impeachment was and I knew the history of presidential impeachment, but I didn't realize that there had actually been other officers removed, specifically, I think, judges. So impeachment has, in fact, been used as a political remedy and has functioned to remove these people from office.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, I think, a critical means of having a check again against those who abuse their power, whether they be a judge, whether they be the president. And it's designed to ensure that we are governed by laws, not by men and women. We are a nation governed by laws, and that is, I think, the equalizer that we have to attain. Now, we understand that we have a justice system that has a lot of problems in the way it's implemented and executed, and a lot of people are not treated fairly under the current justice system. So it's not as if, we have a situation today where, certain people are always held accountable, or in fact that people are treated fairly. But we also have this bedrock principle that no one, even if they're in the highest position of power, can be above the law. And the moment we allow the most powerful person in the country, the President of the United States, to act like he is above the law, that's the moment we give up on democracy and our Constitution, and we move toward autocracy, we move toward a monarchy, and that's very, very dangerous.
As we had just discussed, the Constitution says that you can remove the president, the vice president, and civil officers for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Who determines what the high crimes and misdemeanors are exactly? Because that seems, if you're saying that this person doesn't have to be convicted of anything, how do we determine what a high crime or misdemeanor is?
Well, it's determined by Congress. So the process here is that the House Judiciary Committee initiates an impeachment investigation. That's traditionally how it starts out. And that investigation looks at various facts. The House Judiciary Committee can use its subpoena power to put people under oath, to obtain documents, to uncover what the president or other civil officers have been engaged in doing that are abuses of power. And they then make the determination initially, that committee level, of whether to pass articles of impeachment and move it on to the full House of Representatives for a vote. A simple majority can engage in passing those articles and impeaching the president, and then it must move to the Senate, where the trial occurs, and conviction on articles of impeachment must occur with 2/3 of the Senate voting for removal of the civil officer, and then that person must be removed. Now, we've had 3 instances in our history of the impeachment process moving forward. You referenced the Clinton impeachment. The one that actually is most similar to this situation is the Nixon impeachment process, and that started with the House Judiciary Committee, an impeachment investigation, and then articles of impeachment which were passed during the Watergate era dealing with obstruction of justice, and all the other impeachable offenses that then President Richard Nixon committed. And once those articles of impeachment passed the House Judiciary Committee, then President Nixon removed himself. He recognized he was going to likely be removed ultimately in that process, and so he resigned. And that impeachment process worked as it should, taking somebody out of the office who had so abused the power that it was too dangerous to keep him in there. And I think that's where we are today with Donald Trump. He has effectively shredded the Constitution the way he's acted, trampled on it, acted like he's above the law in so many ways, including starting out by treating the Oval Office as a profit-making enterprise at the public expense, moving on to obstruction of justice and the other legal grounds we cite in the book. And we must hold him accountable for that, and that's the impeachment process.
In the book, you list 8 major grounds, and then you sort of walk through the points within each ground. How did you come up with that list? Was this sort of trying to figure out everything that could be applied? Are there things you think are more likely? Do you see it as possible that Congress would say, yes, we want to impeach, but limit somewhat the scope of what they consider impeachable?
I do think that the grounds that we list, we obviously believe in all 8 of these grounds. And in fact, as this book was going to print, we issued a statement with a 9th ground that's referenced briefly in the book. We didn't have time to go into it as much because it was going to print, but that 9th ground deals with the due process violations and 8th Amendment violations against cruel and unusual punishment that the president was committing through his policy, his outrageous, inhumane policy of separating children from their parents at the southern border, illegally, unconstitutionally, in violation of international human rights law as well, essentially kidnapping children, taking them from their parents merely because they had crossed the border without documents. The Supreme Court long ago has made clear back in the 1800s that whether you're crossing the border legally or without documents, the moment you cross that border, you have due process rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, and those apply to all persons, not only citizens. So that's the 9th ground. That's not as fully discussed in the book, but the other 8 grounds we had been working on, highlighting for some time. They said we issued this briefing paper in December 2017. The facts have only gotten even worse with respect to demonstrating these 8 grounds. And, it's our view each one of these grounds could serve as the basis for articles of impeachment. That being said, we accept that if Congress, as we hope it does, moves forward with an impeachment process, it may not adopt all 8. There were articles of impeachment that were proposed in the Nixon-Watergate era that ultimately did not come up for a vote, or if they did, they didn't get past the House Judiciary Committee. So it is a political process at the end of the day. It's going to be a decision that Congress makes. But we, the people, have a key role in that decision, and that starts with laying the groundwork for why impeachment proceedings should begin. And that's what we're trying to do with this book.
So what can people do to sort of move this process along? Because now Congress is controlled by the Republican Party, and the Republican Party has been fairly locked up with the president. There's been a few, exceptions, and every time he does something terrible, a few people sort of trot out, oh, no, this is terrible. The president shouldn't do that. And then they just sort of go back to letting him do whatever he wants. So sort of what can people actually do? How can we take action?
So that's a great question, and it is actually critical that we, the people, take action to defend our democracy at this very critical moment in our history. When we launched impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org with Roots Action, we created a resources page on that site that includes a lot of what people can do, including passing model resolutions in your own community. There are now 17 communities across the country, including major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco and elsewhere, that have passed a version of our model resolution that calls on Congress to initiate